Matthew chapter 14. Immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came towards Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all who were ill to him, and begged him to let those who were ill just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed.
There's an old saying of Winston Churchill: going to church doesn't make you a Christian any more than standing in a garage makes you a car. How do you tell the difference between a Christian and those that are just sitting in church? One way you can tell the difference is by finding out how people react to Jesus. It is amazing how people's reaction to Jesus actually echoes how they react to God. People often make God a token in their life. They tuck him away in their purses and wallets as a get-out-of-hell-free token. They see God as mostly harmless. He is only around when needed, like a vending machine in the sky. They do not know God. Of course, we know that God is not mostly harmless. All of creation and all of Scripture is deafening in its exhortation that our God is a consuming fire, before whom every knee shall bow when we are confronted by him at the end of all things. The same goes with Jesus. As long as people get what they want out of him, they notice him and claim to know him. They forget him at any other point in their life. They do not stand in awe of him. They ignore him and replace him with their own ability to go through life, or they replace him with possessions. They become their own vending machine. They do not really need Jesus. They do not really know Jesus. We know that Jesus is actually very much needed by people. Take, for example, his nighttime shortcut across the lake. As soon as Jesus walks on open water and hops into a boat, the wind died down. The disciples were terrified. The disciples betray how they think of Jesus in their reaction to him. This was not a holy terror. They do not really know him. The reality was, up until now, they had got what they needed from him. They noticed him and claimed to know him, but they do not stand in awe of him as God's Son. At this point, they are standing in the garage and claiming to be a car. They are tagging along with Jesus and claiming to be true followers. The terror of the disciples betrays the dismal fact that they have reflected very little on the spectacular miracle Jesus performed just a few hours earlier. He fed over 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Of course, the person who can control nature to be able to take a few scraps of food and feed thousands of people can also handle nature well enough to subdue a storm or even walk on water. Matthew 14:22, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. If Jesus truly is the promised Messiah that we read about in Matthew chapter 1 verse 1, then he is meant to be the Old Testament king who was in a special relationship to God. Messiah means God's king, the same as Christ means this. He was meant to be the one who had been set apart by God and enabled for a special task to lead God's people forever. Right now, people and the disciples are under the impression that this task of leading God's people is miraculously healing diseases and feeding people. However, if Jesus has the powers he has already displayed, can any responsible disciple be surprised by what he does at this stage? We started looking at the disciples that they were terrified. So our question is, can a legitimate follower of Jesus imagine that this sort of Messiah could call the disciples to himself and then lose them to a ghost? The disciples show that they do not know who Jesus is. With all that happens on this boat, it's personified with Peter. The disciples see Jesus walking on the water towards their boat. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter walks on water. Why? I think Peter was finally starting to understand Jesus' teaching. He was losing his ignorance of Jesus. I think all the terror here that the disciples were experiencing was because of their ignorance of Jesus. They were experiencing the terror of ignorance. Peter was the boldest of the disciples. He said things that others only thought. He did things that others did not have the nerve to do. Peter was uniquely drawn to Jesus. So why did Jesus invite Peter to come out to him and none of the others? It was because he asked. The other disciples may have wanted to. All we know was that they were afraid. Peter asked to come to Jesus. Jesus called him, and he obeyed. Makes you wonder, when Jesus asked, "You give them something to eat," in the previous miracle, why Peter did not just say, "Help me feed them." That would have been the logical response. So here, ironically, the logical thing for Peter to do is to ask Jesus for help to come to him, even if it means walking on water. He is a slow learner, but Peter is getting it. Up until now, the teaching and actions of Jesus led people to whatever conclusions they wanted to draw, like being in a country and expecting a language to just come to you. People's understanding of Jesus was shallow and unhelpful. So for those who were healed, they simply got better. Those that were fed stopped being hungry. The disciples have more than this. They are thrown deep into Jesus. Their faith and trust in him were not to be about the feeding of 5,000 and walking on fluid. Their faith and trust in him were to be more than bread and water. It was about him. This faith comes when you are not only following Jesus, but are actively learning and doing what you learn in the place that it matters. Peter does not finish the lesson well. He still fears and sinks. So Jesus says to Peter, and probably the rest of the disciples also, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" This does not mean they were stupid, nor does it mean that their minds were unable to learn what Jesus was showing. The lesson for the disciples is simple. Doubt is the opposite of faith here. Fear leads to doubt. The realization that they do not have the personal ability or material possessions to follow Jesus leads to their fear. The disciples' entire orientation was still too restricted, too focused on the immediacy of their fears, too limited by their inability to understand who Jesus is and why he came. But they do start to get the lessons of faith, fear and doubt. Matthew 14:33. Those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Clearly, just tagging along with Jesus is not how it works. Faith means more than pretending you are a car when all you are really doing is sitting on the garage floor. Saying you know Jesus does not make you a Christian. As this year unfolds before us, you might be hopeful or excited, or maybe, like me, doubtful and quite a bit uncertain. I was filled with doubt as I faced this year. I had many questions in my mind. I could not see the path before me. I was pitiful. I doubted God, even though he has shown me much proof. But God is a God of gracious dealings in my life. This is more than just a blind belief to me. I have witnessed his providence time and time again through all the phenomena that occur in the world around me and in my very own life. God's power is magnified through his actions, so doubting should not be a choice. In order to overcome doubt, we have faith in Jesus. Faith kills fear. Faith is not blind. Faith in Jesus is trusting in someone that we know. You want to not fear? You want strong faith? I say do what Peter did right. Ask to come to Jesus. Hear Jesus' call and obey. Read the Gospel of Matthew again. Hear of the life of Jesus. One goal of the Gospel is to help believers keep faith in Jesus. Our lives as Christians are lives of faith. Faith is trust in what we see and hear about Jesus and God. When Jesus walks on water, the disciples see Jesus as something they need to trust. We accept Jesus Christ by faith. We trust the witness of the gospel. We must live our lives by faith in Jesus. We trust in him because of his witness in the gospel. There is no such thing as armchair Christianity. We are called to be participators, not spectators, and that means we are called to have faith in Jesus. We are in the boat with the terrified people. We are on the ground amongst the hungry people, and we trust Jesus. Let us not fear or doubt. God will do great things. How do we start doing this? Let me finish by thinking about us sitting here as church. As Jesus climbs into the boat, let me connect this with another boat metaphor. The kind of Christians we are reflected in the kind of church we are. A cruise ship or a battleship. Too often, people evaluate church like a cruise ship. Do I like the music they play in the ballroom? Do I like the captain and his crew? Is the service good? Am I comfortable and are my needs being met? Is my cruise pleasant? Is it comfortable? Do I want to sail with them again next time? Is this our church? Do not sit here like you are a part of a cruise. A better metaphor is made with a battleship. Is the ship on a clear and noble mission? Does the captain submit to a higher authority? Are the crew members equipped to succeed? Are they able to contribute in significant ways? Are they honoured for their efforts? You all are the crew. I started by asking this question. How do you tell the difference between a Christian and those that are just sitting in church? Of course, it is seen in your reaction to Jesus. Do you trust him? Do you know him? Do you stand in awe of him? Through him, do you know God? You are not just sitting there. You have an active and real faith in God. Do not cruise through life tagging along with Jesus. Or have you joined him, following a ship of purpose, battle ready in its mission to be disciples and to have them made, ready to follow Jesus with an active faith, trusting in him and in God with no fear?